It's the week of March 5th, 2018, and you're listening to the Pioneer GrowingPoint Agronomy Podcast. Today we discuss planting considerations for 2018. I'm your co-host, DuPont Pioneer Field Agronomist Josh Shofner. With me is DuPont Pioneer Field Territory Manager Fred Schliep. This is episode 3 of 2018. Welcome back, listeners. Well, Fred, kind of a last-minute add to the show here. Not a lot of prep work, so if the show's a little off today, I guess we'll let you off the hook.
We're going to have to go with it. Congratulations. Shout out to Brian Buck on the birth of his child, so we're pretty excited with that. But yeah, filling in now, and here we are in episode 3 of 2018. We just kind of take a look back. The last 2 casts that we had, episode 1, we talked about variety selection, field planning with our special guest, Chad Greenway. Last week, we got in the deep dive of crop nutrition, and now today, what is our topic?
Yeah, today we're going to get into some planning considerations for 2018, and obviously, Fred, every spring as we get to planning, we get a lot of questions. Certainly, some shows we talk a little bit about equipment and planter preparation, and this one we're going to kind of take a little bit of a look back at the 2017 planting season, and really when we got into April and conditions were starting to get fit. For whatever reason, last year there was just a lot of questions around should we plant or shouldn't we plant just based on current conditions.
Yeah, conditions were just looking great in the spring. And then all of a sudden it's, is it too early when you look at the calendar? I think we get hung up on what the calendar date is versus what our soil conditions are in seed bed. And we kind of had some, what do we do at this point?
Yeah, and certainly when we look at planting dates, I always like to say, Fred, every planting date has risk, right?
Absolutely.
No matter what day it is, there's risk. It's kind of what we do in farming, and certainly there's risk to everything. But, when I think about this topic in general, Fred, I think it's just, let's kind of take a little bit of a trip back here and kind of look at maybe the last 4 planting seasons and take a look at what we've learned around planting date. And certainly when we talk about planting date, obviously a lot what we're talking about is return on investment. And when you do look at a return on investment, planting date has a role, but it doesn't cost us anything more. So, whether we're planting April 15th or May 15th, our cost of operation is the same, but certainly we'll kind of go through these and take a look at it. So, Fred, you probably remember 2013 pretty well.
Absolutely.
It's kind of the year that we coined the phrase prevent plant, and certainly a spring that probably most of us I don't ever want to see it again.
No, and it drug on, and the decisions of should we plant, shouldn't we plant. Seed conditions were right for a couple days, but we were looking at moisture coming. And then it got to how late do we plant? Are we going to get a crop? Will we be able to finish stuff? And I think we learned a lot with some of the hybrids that got planted on certain dates, what can happen and not happen.
Yeah, and I think in every spring, I always feel like I revert back to the previous spring more than anything. And certainly rolling out of 13 as we looked at 2014, the spring was eerily similar at times to 2013, and I think a lot of us were concerned, is it going to be the same? But certainly when we think of 2013 and 14, I'm not saying we didn't care about planting conditions, but we probably planted in more marginal soils than what I've ever probably seen in my career. And Fred, when we look back at this, we did get, I think we had 56 of our locations that we got planted that spring, our PKP locations that we plant across southeast Minnesota. Fred, if we look at that data, looking at the bottom there on your sheet there, still, even though we planted some tough conditions, we saw some value to early planting.
Oh, absolutely. When we start looking at average on the early planting of 213 bushel versus our late planting of 185 bushel, you could tell the farmers that went out and got at it, there was some risk there, but the benefit of planting early sure outweighed any kind of conditions that we had.
Yeah, so when you look at that, Fred, I look at that first round of planting that averaged 213.1. We had 17 locations planted between April 25th and May 10th. Looking at our temperatures and soil conditions at that time, I'm seeing a lot of mornings it was in the low 20s. We had rains ahead of 20 degrees. We had some snow in there. By no means was it good planting conditions. Soil temps, a lot of mornings were probably in the 30s, but we did get those locations in there. And when we do look at that last planting, getting out there where we finished up the, kind of May 20th and beyond, we had warm soils, temperatures up in the 70s at times, but the best conditions we planted all year, but we gave up almost 20 bushel an acre from that. So certainly, you look at that year where we just kind of did what we could. If we get across the field, we did it. For 20 bushel an acre, it was worth being out there in April.
Yeah, and the attitudes were, let's get this thing in. We did not want to drag it out or, be a victim to any kind of weather circumstances. And, the seed is a little bit hardy, too. It handled the cool, wet conditions that we had at night and came through good.
And Fred, sometimes we get into early planting, we do get some springs. 2015 and 2016 were a little bit more favorable springs. 2016, we got going really early. I want to say we had some locations in the ground around April 13th, and we wrapped up by May 8th. We were pretty much done. But certainly, sometimes that early plant, we get the question, well, what about our risk of frost? And boy, 2016 delivered that for us.
It sure did. That year, people were looking at the insurance date and just wanting to get out there. They went out, they planted. Yes, we did have frost. It was kind of an exciting year for us as agronomy people to watch and really use it as a test. A lot of interesting things when we put a time-lapse photography out there to see how the reaction of the plant was, how winter hardy it can be, or cold hardy, I guess is what you call it. But the way the crop came through that spring was amazing.
Exciting experience was probably not the way most of us looked at that spring, Fred, but I guess that's one way to look at it. And I always kind of look back to that May 14th frost as kind of a week to 10 days of our life we'll never get back from all the running around we did and trying to manage that. But Fred, we had a lot of locations in that year, and when we do look at the data from 2016, we look at the early plant all the way through. It's the only year since 2014 we didn't see a positive yield response to early planting, but we didn't see a negative. It would really, if we look at all those planting dates, it was just a flat line curve. Whether you planted April 15th or you planted on May 8th when you finished, we saw about a flat line response to yield on that year. However, unique year, you really don't get to compare frost. There wasn't a side-by-side. Either it froze or it didn't, right? So there's nothing to compare to. But if you look at it, we still had drier grain on early planting, and we maybe were able to get done a little sooner. The other part was we had 3,000 GDUs before frost, which when you create that long of a growing season, maybe not surprised by those results.
Fixed a lot of the issues that we had early on.
So now we roll into 2017, Fred, which we had more questions than what we've ever had. If I look back to last spring, I probably had 50 or 60 different phone calls on what to do. And it specifically around that April 23rd time. That's about the time it got fit that we could get out there. And Fred, I think you and I have kind of agreed on this. I've said this for a long time that in my opinion, and this is just our opinion, that once the soil is truly fit, and maybe not looking at soil temperature so much, if it's truly fit and you're past insurance state, our message is we should be planting.
Absolutely. And that's what we looked at. We saw it. The growers that went out there did it. The seed beds were excellent. We had a 2 to 3 day window where things were perfect. People got out there, got after it. The corn came up later on. It looked great.
Yeah, and certainly, and one thing I always say, Fred, is, I'm always a believer that sometimes we get concerned about that chilling injury, right? We're concerned about planting in April, and 5 days down the road, we're looking at a rain and 35 degrees. That's what gets us concerned. And certainly, I understand that concern, and maybe in some really sandy soils, we got to be just a touch more conservative about that. But if we do look at all the data we do, and we look at last year, Fred, in my opinion, I always think that chilling injury is almost equal or less of a risk than crusting in May. And when we do look at last year, we actually saw some of our worst stands and worst performing corn when we planted in the best conditions leading up to Mother's Day.
Right. And that early stuff, yes, like you say, we do lose some to corkscrewing, but if it's 2 to 3 plants out of 32,000 or 35,000 versus a late planted in May, the risk reward shows you every time we should be planting early if soil conditions, seed beds are correct.
Yeah, and if we look at the data from last year, certainly we did give up a little stand on the April 23rd to May 1st. But Fred, we averaged about 246 bushel per acre then. We get out to May 1st to the 6th. That was actually our best stands, but we only averaged 240 bushels. So we had our best stands. We gave up 6 bushel. We look at our best planting conditions, kind of that May 7th to May 12th run. We dropped down to, about 233 bushel, a little bit of a rebound May 9th through the 12th to 235. But, again, we got to chase that 10 bushel and get it in April if we can.
Yep.
Looking at soybeans, Fred, it's kind of the same thing. I'm not going to spend as much time on soybeans, but, University of Wisconsin says this, and our data really mirrors that once you get past that first week of May, it's just shy of a half a bushel a day that we lose. And certainly, in my opinion, once you hit insurance state, if you have 2 planters, you should be planting both at the same time.
We've seen it time and time again, and with our ability to go out there with a seed treatment, we can address a lot of the issues that we have with the early planting soybeans. The frost that we've had with soybeans a little bit hardier plant. It does take some real cold temperatures to knock that out. But as we go with it, looking at the seed treatments, it helps us plant earlier, get things set up for a crop later on.
Yeah, so that's kind of our message on planting, and you think about getting ready. Certainly, We're just going to be, maybe 5-6 weeks away from having to be ready to roll. So certainly important to be out there early. Fred, this was episode 3 of a 5-show series about improving ROI. Next week we'll be talking crop protection. Fred, any upcoming crop shop appearances?
I do. I'll be Tuesday, actually tomorrow, at the Cannon Falls Golf Course.
I will be there too, subbing in for Brian Buck. I'll also be in Albert Lea tomorrow evening at 5 o'clock as well. Fred, always important to know where to find the podcast show.
You can follow us on Twitter at Josh Shofner, at FarmerBuck1, or at myself, Fred Schliep.
Yeah, always be sure to tune into those Periscope Live. You can also find us at podcast.pioneer.com. Also YouTube, keyword Pioneer, Shofner Buck.
Well, that's a wrap for episode 3 of 2018. This show was recorded in Goodhue, Minnesota. It is produced by Brian Buck and Josh Shofner. Thanks for listening, and be sure to tune in next time.